I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it. Welcome to episode 30. We got a pretty full slate for today's episode, but we're excited to get into it. So our first topic, we're going to be talking about the NBA 2K video game. Obviously, the big news coming out from them is they released their cover athletes. So obviously, we have one of Damian Lillard on the Xbox One version, Zion Williamson on the was it next gen? I don't know what the next generation Xbox is going to be called, but he's on that cover,
Yeah.
and Kobe Bryant, which I presume will be on the $100 version or $80 version, whatever the pricing may be. So, what are your initial thoughts on that? So,
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty smart by 2K to be having three of the most marketable people in the basketball world right now on their covers. Obviously, Damian Lillard coming off that huge playoff run with that huge shot against Paul George. I think a lot of the basketball community, a lot of the 2K community really loves Damian Lillard right now, especially with him coming out with rap albums, things of that nature. I think he's just very marketable right now. And then you have arguably the most marketable young basketball player in the entire world right now. Certainly was at Duke with Zion Williamson. It's incredible that he's only played 19 games in the NBA and he already has the 2K cover. That's just absolutely unprecedented. I would not be surprised to see Zion Williamson on the 2K cover again in the 2020s multiple times. And then you have Kobe Bryant. He died. I think it's a little shitty of 2K to kind of take
yeah,
advantage of that
they're
situation
definitely
and
taking advantage of it.
yeah, and put him on the $80/$100 cover with their kind of BS incentives to spend $20 or $50 extra on the video game. So that's kind of a scummy move by 2K. I thought they should have put Kobe on the regular version, maybe had somebody else on the platinum edition, but those are kind of my thoughts on the 2K cover.
Yeah, they're Kobe. They're like, oh, you guys are basketball fans. You love Kobe so much. Why not spend $80 on a cover for him? I think it's a bit crappy what 2K is doing, but obviously it's a business and they're trying to
Yeah.
make some money. But also, I have some problems with Zion Williamson being on the cover as well. I don't think he should be on the cover. I mean, obviously he's a phenomenal athlete, but I just don't think he's played enough. We haven't seen enough of him to grant him a 2K cover. I saw some posts on Instagram where it was LeBron played around 900 games before he was on the cover, and Zion's only played 19 games. I mean, I think that's a little outrageous. I think someone like Ja or Jason Tatum would be more better suited to be on the cover just because we've seen a little bit more of them playing.
Yeah, it's amazing to just see a player on the Pelicans, such a small market, just be this marketable already. Not even Anthony Davis was this marketable when he was on the Pelicans. He was just as good as Zion Williamson was as a rookie. But again, Zion Williamson is just such a big basketball player. He's just so great his first 19 games. They just kind of wanted to capitalize upon that. But I mean, just more pressure to put on Zion Williamson as well, which I think is a bit unfair to him as well. He didn't really ask for any of this, and he's already being crowned again, being the 2K cover athlete. That's even more adding to the pressure for him.
Yeah, he's a 2K cover athlete. He's given a cakewalk to the playoffs for this year, so he's being gifted a lot of things in this NBA season. Even I mean at Duke, I guess he was paid to go to Duke too, so he's living the life right now with presence from basketball organizations.
Yeah, he's really already racking up with the money, and he's only on his rookie deal, which is pretty amazing. I'm not sure how much 2K cover athletes get paid. I would assume they get some of the royalties, some percentage of the cut from the game. But again, that's just awesome for Zion. I know he was complaining that they didn't really get his player right in 2K20, so I'm sure they'll definitely make sure to get his player right in 2K21. And I think for the video game community, with this 2K news. We don't really care who is on the cover of each game. We just care if the game is good, the quality of the game is good. It's different from 2K20. I certainly wasn't a fan of 2K20, so hopefully 2K21 is better.
Yeah, I think kind of the big thing about 2K is I think it's fun every year to play it, but Madden is just I don't know. It's hard to spend $60 on a Madden video game each year when it's so similar. I think 2K they do add some different things and add some different game mechanics that make it
Yeah,
a little bit newer and fresher. But Madden, I think that's a discussion for another time. our distaste for the new Maddens.
Yeah, 2K, I mean, just their entire online world, the entire park world, that's really unmatched with Madden. You can't really replicate something like that in a football world because you have so many different positions. You have so many just positions where nobody is going to be playing as an offensive lineman to go to a park type setting in
Yeah.
Madden. And that's just the advantage that basketball games have inherently over football games, but especially 2K. They certainly just have a better game engine than Madden does. They have more features, more game modes. So each and every year, 2K does pull out a pretty good game, but pretty similar game as well.
But imagine how fun, like in Madden, if they had a 7-on-7 like my passing so the addition to the game. I don't see them ever adding that, but I mean they did have something like that a couple of years ago with Brett Favre on the cover when you can play with the big-headed athletes. That was really fun to play as a child. But if Madden added something like that, I think it would boost a lot of sales. And they're definitely going to
Certainly.
boost some sales with kind of their new story mode, allowing people to play at college programs. I think that will interest a lot of people.
Yeah, I just know the entire Madden community with all these kind of releases, with all the new details surrounding Madden 21 is just very frustrated and very mad that I know franchise mode is really the staple of the game, and they've really just year in and year out ignored franchise mode because it's just not very profitable for Madden to throw so much time and effort and money into it because they do get the majority of their money off of Ultimate Team and things of that nature.
Yeah, excited to see the future for Madden and 2K, even with the new console coming out. But moving on to our next topic, we have a little bit of a kind of a dream for all baseball fans out there. During quarantine, there was a Field of Dreams type scenario going on. A couple big time baseball players gathered in Florida. Some of them were Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Giancarlo Stanton, Paul Goldschmidt of the St. Louis Cardinals. They gathered together and they were training in Florida, and then one thing led to another, and they kind of had their own little sandlot game go down. And I just can't imagine the competitiveness in those games and how fun those games must have been to watch. Because these are, I mean, it's not like they're some bums in baseball. These are some
Yeah.
big name players. It's Max Scherzer and Verlander, two of the top pitchers in all the MLB, and Giancarlo Stanton when he was not his time with the Yankees a little questionable, but when he was on the Miami Marlins, he was an MVP. So I can't imagine how fun these games were to watch.
Yeah, I can't imagine just living in Florida and walking by your local baseball stadium and just seeing these absolute superstars throwing 99-mile-per-hour fastballs, then Giancarlo Stanton hitting it like 408 out of the park. That'd be absolutely amazing to just witness. I know so many people already commented on that little article that Bleacher Report posted. We need the footage to this. We need the footage to this. I'm sure they never recorded it because I'm sure it's against MLB rules. I'm sure it's against the rules for each club too. My kind of initial thoughts with this Field of Dreams was, oh my God, what if one of these players got injured? Not only would they have to hide the injury from their organization, but they wouldn't be able to get treated from the team doctors. That would have been just very catastrophic if one of these players got injured during some of these games. And baseball is really just a sticky subject with exhibition games because you have pitchers just going full force and at any time their arm could give out. So pretty risky for these players to be doing so, but I'd love to hear it. It's Field of Dreams type scenario, very fun to kind of imagine. And if footage ever gets leaked from these kind of sandlot sessions, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Yahoo Sports article I read about it. It said that the owner or the person who like organized all the athletes there was some sort of athletic trainer, and he got some small little videos and stuff like that. So he might put together a little highlight reel after. But yeah, watching that would be awesome. And he also said that even some football players were there. Jacoby Brissett was there training as well, throwing. So imagine just it just sounds like a summer camp for athletes just
Wow.
training for baseball while Jacoby Brissett's throwing footballs. I mean, it just sounds like such a fun thing to be a part of. If I was an athlete, I would definitely would have tried to get there.
Yeah, it's insane. That's just so studded. I mean, that would have been just so fun to watch. I know so many people love going to kind of spring training, spring training, summer training for football. I know that's a big thing, big selling point for some of these organizations. I've never gone to one personally, but I would love to just because you get to be so up and close and personal to these guys, get autographs and things of that nature. So I hope they do this in the future, but this time without quarantine so some fans could come and watch.
Yeah, I think kind of just less of the kind of the strings attached for spring training. I think a lot of it would be more interactive with the fans, and a lot of more people would enjoy it, and kind of more relaxing for the player as well.
Certainly.
So moving on to our next topic, this is kind of a bigger one. We're gonna do, we're gonna bring back the this or that we've had in a couple different episodes, and this is gonna be NBA Bubble Edition. So we're gonna kind of do this or that players, scenarios, teams, what have you. So you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So my first kind of scenario I would have is would you rather see the Grizzlies and Ja Morant make the playoffs or Zion Williamson and the Pelicans make the playoffs?
That was actually my one of mine. I was gonna say who will perform better, Zion or Ja. So I'll kind of mold the two into one little talking point.
Sure.
But I'd rather have, I mean, for a spectator standpoint, I'd rather have Zion Williamson in the playoffs because just outside, look, if you're looking at the Pelicans outside of Zion, I think they have a lot more talent on their roster, and they're a lot more kind of fun to watch because you have Lonzo Ball, you got Drew Holiday, you have Josh Hart, who's the Jackson Hayes, the center. I think they're a lot more fun to watch, and they're a lot more of a better team. Outside of Ja, the Grizzlies are a little bit struggling with who their identity is outside of Ja. I mean,
Yeah.
you have Jaren Jackson, who is a rising star, and I think he'll be a great second player to Ja Morant. But outside of those two, outside of Ja and Jaren Jackson, the Grizzlies really fall off. That's why they're. I mean, it's so impressive how Ja was able to compel that team to the playoff spot.
Yeah.
But kind of moving on to what my scenario that I had, I'll use that as my first one. Who will perform better, Ja or Zion? I think Ja will perform better because I think he has a chip on his shoulder that the NBA kind of gave him such a cakewalk, kind of gave Zion such a cakewalk to make the playoffs. That I think Ja will really try to perform his hardest to set his team up to make the playoffs, and I think Ja will have some outstanding numbers and outstanding moments in this bubble league.
I agree with that. And even if Zion Williamson's raw numbers are better than Ja on paper, Ja has just so much more of an effect for wins and losses for this Grizzlies team than Zion does with the Pelicans thus far because I know Zion's still coming off that injury, not 100% just trained and really motivated thus far. I mean, he's very motivated, but just in terms of conditioning, he's not 100% yet still, I don't think. So just Ja, of course, being a point guard, having the ball in his hands every single play. I mean, the game really runs through Ja Morant for the Grizzlies, which, again, to your point, makes it so amazing that they did this good this season. So Zion, of course, also plays very sporadic minutes, plays about 5 to 6 minutes at a time. So again, I would love to see Ja Morant make the playoffs over Zion Williamson, to be honest, not from a marketing standpoint, maybe not even from an entertainment standpoint, but I just love watching young point guards really perform at the highest level, at the highest stages, and just really see what they can do with the ball in their hands.
Yeah. So all right, are gonna use my Zion Ja one as my first one, or do you want me to do another one, another scenario?
You can do another one.
All right. So for my first scenario, I'll do who have on your defense, kind of leading your defense. Would you rather have Patrick Beverly or DeJounte Murray of the Spurs, who is the youngest all defense selection, and he was on the second team a couple years ago? Who would you rather have?
As an all-around team defender, I'd probably want to have Pat Beverly just because not only he's a great defender, but he's just so tenacious. He talks shit just each and every single possession down on the court. He's just really that leader that will fuel your defense to wins. But DeJounte Murray, I think, is a better individual one-on-one defender. So if we're looking at a team like the Clippers who have so many great defensive pieces, I'd rather have a guy like DeJounte Murray because you don't need him to carry your team defense. You just need him to guard the best player one on one. And DeJounte Murray, I mean, he has more length than Pat Beverly. he's just more of a versatile defender than Pat Beverly is, I think, at this point in their careers. DeJounte Murray, I think, is also better at the offensive end than Pat Beverly at this point. I mean, he's just a great young talent on the Spurs, another homegrown guy they have that they've been able to develop into just a really, really good defender and a pretty decent offensive player as well. So I think I'd rather have DeJounte Murray.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you with this one. I think they're pretty similar with their defensive ability. DeJounte Murray might be a little bit better, but I just think having kind of more of an offensive skill set with DeJounte Murray, I think that's what would put him above Patrick Beverly. And Patrick Beverly, like you said, he does talk a lot, and he does talk a lot of trash, and that can result in some kind of technical fouls, and that might hurt your team also down the road. So I think DeJounte Murray just kind of is Patrick Beverly without like the frills attached
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah, and with Patrick Beverly, I mean, when a guy talks that much trash, it either is good for you or bad for you because you have some guys like LeBron where if you have little pests at him, he gets even better and he rises his game to a new level. So that's not good in that aspect, but most guys in the NBA, I think, if you really get in their head, start really clamping them up on defense when they're on offense, they can really just catapult that into a really bad game. So in that sense, that's why Patrick Beverly is so good against so many guys. I even saw him really do that when he was on the Rockets versus Russell Westbrook. I know he really would frustrate him when Russell Westbrook was on the Thunder and Pat Bev was on the Rockets. So Pat Bev is great in that sense, just getting in guys' head. But some players you just can't really get in their head, and it'll motivate them even more.
Yeah, I mean, look at someone like Kawhi Leonard. He's just so quiet, and if there's an article about him in college, and all his trash talk was just when he would like shut someone down, he just go, nope, nope. That was the only trash talk he did, and like having that in your head and not having someone screaming in your face like Patrick Beverly, I think someone being quiet, like a quiet assassin, I think that's a lot more beneficial and a lot more kind of frustrating.
Yeah, me as well. But going on to my next kind of would you rather is would you rather have Jimmy Butler or Tobias Harris? And this is kind of a 76ers scenario because they kind of chose Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler last offseason.
I think I'd rather have Jimmy Butler. I think he's a kind of their offensive ability are a little bit similar. I think I don't know
Yeah.
who to give an outdoor, but I think like kind of what we said about Patrick Beverly, I think Jimmy Butler is very tenacious on the defensive side,
Yeah.
and he's a I think he's a fantastic leader. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I think it might have been on the Timberwolves when he was on the Timberwolves, but he beat the starters with the second strings, and that just
Yeah.
shows how he's able to compel his team to really try hard and really win games. So I think I'd rather have Jimmy Butler over Tobias Harris.
Yeah, looking at the 76ers roster, their main hole and just the main thing that's really lacking is shooting. And if you replace Jimmy Butler with Tobias Harris, that doesn't really change anything. I think they're both around the same level of 3-point shooting. They both don't shoot at a very high volume, but they're about league average at the 3-point shot at this point in their career. Tobias Harris certainly used to be better of a shooter, but he's kind of regressed over the past couple of seasons in terms of shooting. But just looking at this roster for the 76ers, every single one of your guards has just a major, major, major weakness to their game, whether that's Ben Simmons, TJ McCollum, any of their guards just have a major weakness. And that's where I look at Jimmy Butler could have been so beneficial to this team as a guard because he's great defensively and great offensively, has no real major weakness. And looking at Tobias Harris, I know he's a bit of a tweener, small forward, power forward, but he's a bit redundant in their offense and especially in their defense because they already have Al Horford and Joel Embiid for their defensive side. So Tobias Harris, of course, is a very nice player, but I think Jimmy Butler would have been much better on this 76ers team than Tobias Harris is just in terms of fit. So certainly I would rather take Jimmy Butler on the 76ers if I was the 76ers at this point.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of Jimmy Butler, I mean, he was homeless when he was in high school. He went to Marquette. He's just such a hard worker. I think I would pick him in a lot of scenarios about kind of outworking a lot of different players. He just has that it factor with him.
Certainly, I mean, you have Tobias Harris, who is a quiet guy. He's gonna go out there get the job done. Then you have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, who are young guys, a bit immature in a sense, I believe. So having that structure in Jimmy Butler, having that leader, having that voice, is just so vital, so key, and I think that's what we're gonna see to be the downfall of the 76ers this season besides their shooting.
So I'm gonna kind of piggyback off your Jimmy Butler scenario. Which team do you think will go farther? Similar seeding. Would you rather have, or which team will go farther, the Heat or the Thunder?
Wow, I mean, that's a really, really interesting one. I do think the Heat are going to go farther, not necessarily because I think the Heat are a better team. I think just the bottom of the East, really looking at their standings, is just significantly worse than the bottom of the West. I was kind of looking to see who could overtake the Nets as the seventh seed right now, and certainly the eighth seed can do that, but besides that, I really see the Nets end up making the playoffs just because all the other teams are way too far behind. So if the Heat end up playing a kind of mid-tier team in the East, I do think they can get out of the first round. Meanwhile, I think the Thunder are slated to play the Rockets in the first round, and that's just a really tough matchup for them. Again, I think both of these teams are both very, very good teams, both led by very great players in Chris Paul and Jimmy Butler. I think the Heat have more of a cohesive unit, though, as well. I mean, they just have a lot of really great defensive pieces, a playmaker in Jimmy Butler. Then they just have a bunch of really good shooters around Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. While the Thunder just have really a collection of really great young talent, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You have, of course, Chris Paul, like I just said, Danilo Gallinari. Those guys aren't too young, but just, again, a really good Thunder team. But I would take the Heat to move on to at least the second round. Meanwhile, the Thunder maybe as good of a team as the Heat, but I would see it being kind of hard for them to leave the first round.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the Heat would go farther. I think the Heat are kind of one of those dark horse teams in the Eastern Conference because the East is a lot weaker. Because if you brought up the point of the Nets making the playoffs, and we talked about yesterday how they're going to have pretty much a no-name squad. So
Yeah.
if that's a playoff team, I think the Heat are going to be really successful with the roster they have on their team because they have Jimmy Butler as the leader, they have Bam Adebayo, and then they have great shooters with Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. I mean, they have a pretty complete team, and I think they can really rise through the ranks of the Eastern Conference in a couple of years when their younger talent becomes more of starts hitting their prime. But the Thunder are a great team. I'm really surprised what they did this year. I mean, Chris Paul has led this team with Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder. I thought they were going to take a significant step back with the loss of Russell Westbrook, but they really
Yeah.
proved that they're a great team. But playing in the Western Conference, the lower seeded teams are all still great teams, so it's going to be hard for them to be able to move on.
Yeah, and just looking at the Heat as well, they've matched up so greatly against some of the best teams in the East. I mean, they've matched up very well against teams like the Bucks, like the 76ers, with Bam Adebayo really anchoring that defense for them. I mean, to say Jimmy Butler's not your best defender, wow, you must have some great defenders on your basketball team. I really think Bam Adebayo is that good of a player, that good of a defender thus far in his career. I mean, I know it used to be Al Horford being that kind of Joel Embiid stopper, but when he signed with the 76ers, it really turned into Bam Adebayo. He's been great against some really great big men in the NBA, including Giannis Antetokounmpo as well. But transitioning into my next kind of would you rather, this is kind of transitioning into kind of some Eastern Conference teams and Eastern Conference matchups. So would you rather want to see the Bucks versus the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals or the Bucks versus the 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals?
That's an interesting one. That's pretty tough. I don't know. I think I'd rather see the Bucks versus the 76ers because I think just Joel Embiid versus Giannis would be. I think that'd be just a sight to see. Just having those two giants in the paint facing off one another. Joel Embiid kind of being a brick wall in the paint, while Giannis is that fluid, lanky guy, and he's able to be more athletic than Joel Embiid is. But I think that'd be a really fun series to watch because they both talk so much trash. Joel and Giannis. I think I said Zion earlier, but
Yeah.
my apologies. But I think that would be really fun to watch. I think both teams are really gritty teams and really would face off nicely against each other.
Yeah, well, I would have to agree with that just because while I do think the Celtics are potentially a better team than the 76ers, certainly have more talent on paper than the 76ers, it's just that the Bucks and 76ers have the same weaknesses and the same strengths as each other for the most
Yeah.
part. And I kind of like seeing fire versus fire rather than like water versus fire, that type of analogy with the Bucks, because I think the Bucks would just absolutely destroy the Celtics down low. They really have no players to stop their big guys. Meanwhile, the Bucks really don't have too many guys to guard the Celtics' plethora of perimeter talent. I'm not too confident in Kemba Walker at this point playing for the Celtics. I think we've seen kind of a disappointing regression from Kemba Walker, and I'm a little nervous to see him play in this bubble and play in the playoffs. I think he might get a little bit exposed as a shorter point guard in the playoffs, more defensive attention towards him, and just more attention on the defensive side to him. I think whoever plays the Celtics are going to try to attack Kemba Walker each and every time down the court. And I think that could be a bit disastrous for the Celtics team later on in the playoffs. So I certainly rather see the Bucks 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, I mean, and also the point you made with fire versus fire, like both teams are not the greatest three-point shooting team, so it's going to be a really hard-nosed battle in the paint. So I think it would be just driving to the paint. I think that'd be just really a fun, entertaining series to watch because I think it would be really, really defensive oriented and a hard-nosed game and low-scoring basketball.
Certainly.
So moving on to my next one, a player with a player scenario. Who has more on their back, or like who has to perform better in this bubble series would be James Harden or Russell Westbrook, both on the same team, but who is more expected to perform at a higher level?
Yeah, they both have this narrative of being great regular season players and really just not performing at the highest level kind of in the playoffs, in playoff scenarios. But I do think at the end of the day, it's going to be James Harden that has more of an expectation around him and who needs to play better, because not only has he kind of gone deeper into the playoffs by himself than Russell Westbrook has without Kevin Durant, but I do think that James Harden, I mean, he's again the leader in the NBA in scoring. I think he's just legacy wise, overall wise, in everybody's mind, kind of just a better player right now in the median fashion and has been over Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook really has been in the MVP conversation only once in his career, really, and that was the year he won it. And James Harden has been the MVP conversation for the past 6-7 years. I mean, he has so many second place, third place, fourth place finishes. So with all those expectations, with almost winning an MVP award twice, 3, 4 times, I just think James Harden has a little bit more on his plate than Russell Westbrook does, especially considering the last couple playoff series with his kind of Western Conference final meltdown. Meanwhile, Russell Westbrook is a bit less fresh on everybody's mind because he's been losing in the first round the past couple of years.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on this one. I think the role that Westbrook took on this Rockets team kind of takes a little bit off of his back with the expectations of him performing in the playoffs. But a lot of people talk about how James Harden is one of the best offensive players in league history. So having that mantra around his name, it's expected for him to play well in the playoffs. And if you can't play well, it's an extreme disappointment. So I think he does have to perform well in this playoffs because he does. I mean, when you think about James Harden, you think about playoff moments, but they're never positive. You think about Manu Ginobili blocking him from behind, or you think about his poor shooting against the Warriors, getting beaten. Was it 5 or 4 games? I can't remember, but he just doesn't perform. He doesn't step up on the biggest stage. So I think there's a lot on his back with James Harden right now.
Yeah, and I think with Russell Westbrook, he doesn't necessarily play worse in the playoffs. Just kind of his play style gets a little bit exposed in the playoffs, and I think that's kind of similar of James Harden too. Just the wear and tear of his game style, just shooting so many shots per game, just really being so reliant on James Harden for this Mike D'Antoni system. It really just takes a toll on him. And by the time he gets to the third round of the playoffs, he's just really worn out. So that's kind of the problem I see with the Rockets. But hopefully both of these teams, both of these players are able to kind of fix their past playoff woes. But transitioning into my second to last kind of would you rather scenario, would you rather have the combination of Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic, or have the combination of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid?
That's a good one. I think if you're looking at it from the standpoint of kind of 90s basketball or 80s basketball, you would definitely take Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. But
Yeah.
in today's game, with kind of the way the game's evolving with people shooting, I'd rather have Kristaps and Luka Doncic because they can really shoot. They can shoot significantly better than Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I mean, Joel Embiid can shoot the three, but Ben Simmons' shot is just non-existent, pretty much non-existent. So I think rather
Yeah.
having Kristaps Porzingis be able to stretch the floor better than Joel Embiid puts him on a higher level because Luka Doncic is able to shoot the three and he's a lot more creative. I think he's similar to LeBron James in his play style. I think Ben Simmons and Luka Doncic have a similar play style with kind of opening the floor for their other players to get involved. But I think Luka Doncic and Kristaps is a better combination.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Now, I think it's very close because at this point in their careers, I do think Joel Embiid is significantly better than Kristaps Porzingis. Now, I know just Kristaps Porzingis really hasn't been the same since that Knicks injury. Really hasn't been the same since he kind of went out and said, "I'm tired," and the entire media just kind of blasted him for saying that. Ended up getting hurt about 10 games after the "I'm tired" kind of mantra, and he's really just been an inconsistent basketball player since then. I was looking at his shooting splits, just his percentages, and they're just very, very bad. But Kristaps Porzingis, if he can get into form, even right now, if he's not shooting at that consistent rate, he's still going to get you 20 points per game, and he's really still going to stretch the floor. And I just think at this point, Luka Doncic is significantly better than Ben Simmons. He's just all around. He does everything Ben Simmons does on the offensive end in terms of passing and distributing and just being the ball handler. But I mean, he's just one of the best scorers in the NBA already. I know Ben Simmons is better defensively at this point, but Luka Doncic is just so deadly at the offensive end. Not only that, but really what puts this Mavericks duo ahead for me rather than the 76ers is just that Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic's games really complement each other, while Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid's games really just butt heads all game, every game. And we especially saw that in the playoffs last year. Their games, again, they just really don't complement each other in the half court offensive setting. And that's why they've lost games this year. That's why they're not that high of a seed this year. And that's why they really struggled in the playoffs last year, is just because Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid just do not play together well at all and really just have very, very bad on court chemistry, even though it seems to be they have very good off the court chemistry.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would talk about the Mavericks kind of in a better light if they did have a better roster around them, around their two stars. I mean,
Yeah,
outside of Luka and Kristaps Porzingis, there's just not a lot on that roster. So if the Mavericks in the future are able to solidify their bench and other starters on that team, that the Mavericks can potentially be one of the cream of the crop in the NBA.
certainly.
So moving on to my last topic, kind of a scenario between teams. Would you rather be a bottom bubble team, so say like the Suns, the Wizards, or would you rather be outside of the bubble, but you're not in contention for kind of a top lottery pick? You kind of that team that just missed the bubble, like the Bulls or the Hornets.
No, I just saw news that came out where for the 8 teams that you were just kind of alluding to, like the Bulls, like the Hornets, like the Knicks, not like the Knicks because they're kind of a bottom feeder, but they're going to have a bubble in Chicago for a kind of training and summer camp starting in September. So they're still fresh compared to the other teams that are in the bubble. But still, I do rather have a team travel to the bubble because even though you wouldn't make the bubble, it really still tests your team's adversity and strengths and weaknesses, and you really get a better picture of what you need to improve upon in the offseason, getting those last 8 games to kind of play, test out some of your role players. Honestly, if I was kind of a bottom feeder in the bubble and there's 3 games left, there's no way I was making the playoffs. I would just kind of use that to give these guys at the bottom of my roster significant minutes to really see what they can do against playoff caliber teams. So I would certainly rather be that team at the end of the bubble missing it rather than missing out on the just bubble entirely. And that was actually my last would you rather as well.
Yeah, I think I'd rather be a bubble team as well because you're getting kind of playoff type atmosphere. I mean, you don't have fans, but playoff type game scenarios that your team will be playing, and that can potentially make your team better, make the players on your team a lot better with getting in-game experience. But kind of being a bottom feeder, being a team that's not in lottery contention and not making the bubble, I just don't. It's going to be hard to get your team into a playoff caliber level like that bubble team because they are getting that in-game experience.
Certainly, and I just think it's very embarrassing for the 8 teams that ended up missing the bubble because it's like in the year that 22 teams are going to have the opportunity to make the playoffs, to be one of those 8 teams that ended up not making the playoffs, you just have to be very bad to, again, not make the playoffs, not even get a chance at the playoffs for this 22 kind of bubble tournament they're going on. So just out of embarrassment reasons, out of integrity reasons, I just think missing out on this bubble entirely is just not a good look for some of these franchises, especially the New York Knicks.
Well, you got to take a shot at me with the New York Knicks, but yeah, the Knicks really have to get their act together. I mean, I read an article on Bleacher Report a couple of days ago how the Knicks were LeBron's #1 destination in 2010, and they botched the interview, and LeBron didn't even ask for a second interview. It was bad. I mean, Jamie from Sopranos reenact a scene. That was their only pitch. I mean, when you have potentially the best basketball player of all time as his #1 team, and you're not able to capitalize that, that's when you know you're a terrible organization.
Yeah, I read that article, and apparently after the first interview, he was absolutely horrified. It was just a disaster of an interview. And you really see Miami LeBron looking back at that information. He really has tenacity every single time he's in the Garden. He plays so hard against the Knicks, and I think maybe that disastrous kind of just talk that he had with the Knicks is maybe a part of that.
Yeah, fire someone please buy the team from James Dolan. That would be our only hope, honestly. James Dolan, definitely one of the worst owners in all of sports.
Certainly, and I think this is a conversation for another day, but I think really what they messed up on, especially before that LeBron kind of fiasco, him end up not signing there, was trading for Carmelo Anthony because they traded so many great assets to the Nuggets to the point where they could have waited half of a season just to sign Carmelo Anthony, but they had to trade for him. They had to be impatient. So I really do think that was their first mistake that ended up snowballing into them not getting any players that offseason and them not getting any significant players for the past decade or so.
Yeah, and I plead the Knicks not to draft LaMelo Ball if they get the chance. I think LaMelo Ball will be a bust if he is drafted to New York.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think LaMelo Ball is a player where he needs to be put in the right system, right players, just no distractions to succeed in the NBA. And if you go to the Knicks, everything is stacked against you. You need to be that player who's going to be great no matter what organization and what players you have around you, like guys like LeBron. But I don't really think that's the case with LaMelo Ball.
Yeah. So moving on to our next topic. So video, it didn't surface. It was pretty much released pretty explicitly, but
Yeah.
video of Russell Wilson and Antonio Brown working out in Russell Wilson's backyard, throwing some passes to one another. And that begs the question, will the Seahawks sign Antonio Brown? I mean, there's been reports that the Ravens had interest because Antonio Brown was seen working out with his cousin Marquise Brown and Lamar Jackson earlier in the summer, and then also reports saying that Bucks might make some moves and sign Antonio Brown as well. So, which team do you think will make a bigger push to sign Antonio Brown, despite kind of his significant fall from grace?
I do think it's going to be the Seahawks, not really because of this kind of video surfacing of Russell Wilson and Antonio Brown throwing the ball, but I just think because of Pete Carroll and the organization that the Seahawks are, not only do they kind of need a wide receiver at this point, but they really just have such structure to the point where I think Pete Carroll, especially coming off of his college days at USC, he's really used to kind of managing these players, these student athletes that kind of have wild personalities and kind of bring a lot to the table besides the football field. So I think if anybody ends up signing Antonio Brown, it is the Seattle Seahawks. That would be horrible for my Arizona Cardinals, but I really do not think any team is going to sign Antonio Brown at this point, and I think he's going to stay unsigned for honestly the rest of his football career.
Yeah, I mean, I think just his fall from grace has just been more significant, bigger than any other athlete I think in history of sports. Honestly, I mean, you had the rape allegations coming out, and then you had the video of him arguing with the cops when they were kind of detaining his wife or his
Yeah,
ex-girlfriend, or I don't know what their relationship was at the time, but just you really saw the true colors of Antonio Brown happen right from when he was on when it started when he was on the Raiders. But I do think that the team that's most likely to sign him would be the Seahawks. I mean, the history of if you look at the history of Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson in Seattle, they've never had such a high caliber wide receiver. I mean, you can say Doug Baldwin's kind of been the their number one, their best receiver throughout their tenure, but he's not. He's really nothing compared to Antonio Brown. I mean, he's a multiple time All Pro. Was he? He might have been on the All Decade team for the 2010s. I mean,
yeah.
he was that good. I mean, looking at his last season, he played with Pittsburgh. He had a little over 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, which was the league high, I think. He's still a great ball player and a great athlete, but I think it would take a lot of convincing from Russell Wilson to.
Yeah, certainly. And I think just Russell Wilson and the Seahawks team, I mean, at the end of the day, if Antonio Brown is such a significant headache, I don't really think it's worth it. I think it would be kind of subtraction by addition in a sense because I don't even think Antonio Brown is in his prime anymore. I know you can't really tell a lot from these videos, but it doesn't even seem like he's had that kind of first step that he did on the Steelers. I know watching that one Patriots game he played against the Dolphins, I know he did have a touchdown that game, but besides that, he did look a little bit slower on some of his route running. So I just don't really think it would be worth it at this point for an NFL team to sign Antonio Brown.
Yeah, I think he's just such a circus surrounding him. I think it would be hard for a team to really sign him. And if he is past his prime, I mean, you can't really tell from the workout. It is just a workout, a backyard workout. So that's
Yeah,
not can't really be an assumption, a fair assumption. But I think it's gonna be hard for a team to bring him in town, bring the circus with him, surrounding him.
certainly.
So moving on to our last topic of the day, we have the NFC East. So we have the Eagles, Giants, Redskins, Cowboys. You want to start us off with a little bit of what the divisions they will be playing this year?
Yeah, really interesting division going into 2020 is the NFC East. They're going to be playing the NFC West, led by the Seahawks, the 49ers, the Rams, the Cardinals. Then they're going to be playing the NFC North, the Ravens, the Browns. So, pretty tough schedule that this team is going to, or this entire division is going to have to play. So, especially some of their away games playing the Ravens late in the season at Baltimore for some of these teams playing in Cleveland late. I think it's going to be pretty tough going for this NFC East.
Yeah, I think even with those divisions they play, and I think just historically, no matter how good these teams are and bad these teams are, they do play each other very tough
Yeah.
within their divisional games. But I think starting off, I think the team that I'm most confident in to win the division is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah.
I think they have the best quarterback in the division. I think they have probably the best head coach in the division. And I think just I mean, if you look at kind of Miles Sanders, he's been putting in a lot of work, and I expect him to have a pretty great season this year. But with the Eagles drafting Jalen Reagor, I think they're kind of and also trading for Marquise Goodwin, I think they're kind
Yeah.
of trying to solidify that wide receiver position that's been so hard for them the past couple of years with the drops they've had and having such awful receivers the past couple of years. I think they've made the right moves to become the top of this division.
Certainly. And I mean, they're coming off of a wild card loss to the Seahawks. And really, the only reason they ended up losing that game like they did is because they had their backup quarterback playing for most of that game. Carson Wentz kind of went down with a concussion with kind of a cheap hit by a defender on Seattle. But again, they went 9-7 last year. I can see them winning around 11 games this year, quite honestly, if they have a good start to the season. I know the Eagles kind of start off slow sometimes, but I mean, with their additions of, like you said, Marquise Goodwin, Darius Slay, guys like in the draft, they drafted Jalen Reagor. I know I have a bit of a question mark on Jalen Reagor in terms of his catching ability. I know he had some drops at TCU, but really no key losses for this Philadelphia Eagles team. I know they did lose Malcolm Jenkins and they lost Jason Peters, but those were two very old veteran players where they didn't really have that great of effect on the Eagles as you might think because of their big names. So again, with no key losses for this team, being healthy going into the 2020 season, I do think the Eagles are set out to win this division, and they always against the Cowboys. So if they can split against the Cowboys, I do think they're going to win this division.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the Cowboys and the Eagles are the cream of the crop of this division, and those two games that they're going to play each other are going to be very important for who's going to come out on top. But that being said, I think the Eagles are going to finish second in this division. I mean, they do have a great offensive side of the ball. They do have good players on their defensive side, but the big question mark is having Mike McCarthy as a rookie head coach with these Eagles and how Dak is going to be able to perform. I mean, there's with the money he will be paid. I mean, if Zeke is able to perform as well with his his digression throughout the past couple of years, like we've talked about in some previous episodes, I think there's just a lot of question marks on how the Cowboys offense is able to be able.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, going into the Cowboys, the Giants, the Redskins, each and one of these teams have a new head coach going into the season, which is very interesting. These teams are definitely at a disadvantage with the whole COVID offseason, not really being able to implement their full offensive and defensive game plans, I think, each and every week. I think that will have an effect on some of the teams. Some of the roster turnover with the Cowboys, I think, is going to hurt them a little bit too. But I would expect them to go better than 8-8 like they were last season. I mean, this team ended up tagging Dak Prescott. They re-signed Amari Cooper. They re-signed Blake Jarwin, Sean Lee, Anthony Brown, some of their impact players, and they had a very good offseason. I mean, they signed both D tackles, Gerald McCoy and Dontari Poe, who are both very old at this point in their NFL career, but still really good. If you can get some contribute plays and contributions from guys like Alden Smith, Clinton Dix. They did get one of the best kickers in the entire NFL this offseason in Greg Zuerlein. I know they did lose Travis Frederick to retirement, which I think will be huge for this offensive line, but they lost guys like Byron Jones, Robert Quinn, Randall Cobb, Jason Witten, and Jeff Heath to free agency, and I know those are all big names, but at the end of the day, Byron Jones is a good player. I think he's a little bit overrated in today's NFL. Really just is not a playmaker, doesn't turn the ball over for the Cowboys, doesn't have any real eye-popping numbers for them. And just watching them, you can't even really put him on an island. I think he's just an above-average cornerback, so I don't think they're losing too much with Byron Jones. But this Cowboys team also had an incredible draft, one of the best draft classes out of anybody in 2020. Notably getting CeeDee Lamb and cornerback Trevon Diggs, and they got a potential center replacement, I think, in the 4th round. So I think this Cowboys team certainly should be better than 8-8 this season. I think they certainly can make a playoff push this season. But again, I do think the Eagles are really slated to be the best team in this division, and I do think the Cowboys are going to finish with a close second. And I think by week 17, they're still going to be pushing for that division.
Yeah, I think we might be set up for one of those Week 17 kind of Eagles-Cowboys primetime games. Winner gets in the playoffs. I can definitely see that happening. And I mean, even if the Eagles are a runaway for this division, I can see the Cowboys battling for a wild card spot because they do have such a great kind of offense with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Gallup at wide receiver. They have a great wide receiving core. And Mike McCarthy, his time he is a Super Bowl winning head coach. He has a great offensive mind. He did have a great offensive mind. At the end of his Packers tenure, there were some question marks about kind of some of his play calling, but I am confident in Mike McCarthy at kind of getting the organization back together from the mediocrity that was Jason Garrett tenure at head coach.
Yeah, I am as well. And talking about and kind of going off of Jason Garrett, I love how Giants fans the past 10 years have really been the number one people hating on Jason Garrett, kind of making fun of him. And now that he is their new offensive head coach, they're just so excited about Jason Garrett, what he can do with Daniel Jones. I think that's a bit ironic, but transitioning into the Giants, another team that got a new head coach in Joe Judge, something I also find ironic. The very worst, honestly, in my opinion, the worst core of players, the worst position group out of any team in the entire NFL last season, I believe, in my opinion, was the Patriots wide receiving core, along with the Dolphins offensive line. I think they're neck and neck for just the worst core of players in the NFL last season. And of course, the Giants got the former Patriots wide receiver coach, the former Patriot special teams coach, coming off of a season where the Patriots did not do good on special teams, coming off of a season where the Patriots are pretty disastrous at the wide receiver spot. So we'll see what Joe Judge can do at head coach for this Giants team. I think he'll be more of a motivator than anything. He's not really an X's and O's guy, which for a lot of organizations and a lot of teams can prove to be very great. We see that with John Harbaugh with the Ravens, but kind of going into it a little bit, they do have Jason Garrett as their new offensive coordinator, which I really don't love. They're coming off of a 4-12 season, and this offseason was pretty uneventful for the Giants, I would say. I mean, besides their coaching changes, they did lose Marcus Golden, who is a good edge rusher for this team. I mean, they really didn't have any key losses, and they didn't really have any key additions besides signing Blake Martinez. I mean, they had a pretty nice draft getting tackle Andrew Thomas early. Let's see if he can be kind of the tackle of the future for this team. They did get safety Xavier McKinney in the second round. But, I mean, unless Daniel Jones, Darius Slay, Saquon Barkley, and company have huge jumps, I see this team winning around 4 games next season like they did this season.
Yeah, I think they're definitely gonna have some similar. I think they're gonna have a similar record that they did last year. They didn't really make any eye-popping additions to make them have their record have such a jump. But with the signing of Joe Judge as their head coach, I think it was kind of more of like you said, kind of a motivational guy, and they're trying to get kind of the Patriot way into the Giant organization with the motivation and the high standard and having everybody held accountable. But going into the draft, I think they tried to get that tackle with Andrew Thomas to protect Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. But I mean, I look at that as kind of a poor draft pick. I think they could have got
Yeah.
Andrew Jones a lot later in the draft, and they could have got someone better like Jedrick Wills, who I think was one of the best linemen in the whole draft. I think they really reached with Andrew Thomas. Kind of just shows how poor the Giants could be at with their draft and scouting and stuff like that. I mean, that they definitely thought that there was their guy. We talked about that with the Raiders, thinking they outsmarted people getting Damon Arnett, but
Yeah.
I think the Giants kind of thought they outsmarted people getting Andrew Thomas, but he's a really big body, but he lacks the athleticism. Kind of has a little bit of a cement feet. He's not as good as the other linemen I thought. So I think that could be a potential bust for the Giants.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Arizona Cardinals arguably got a guy in the second round, third round, just as good as their guy that they got with the fourth pick in the draft. So I definitely think that was a bit of a reach for the Giants. And this offseason, I mean, it's good in the aspect that they didn't really get tied up in this big money contracts where it was going to cripple this team for 3, 4, 5 years, like we see the New York Jets kind of did last offseason, not this offseason. So it's good in that aspect. They really don't know what they have in a lot of players. But again, I really don't like this Giants offseason because they really just did not get better unless, again, we see significant jumps from guys like Daniel Jones, guys like Darius Slay, and guys like Saquon Barkley. But transitioning into the last team in this division, I think the Giants and the Redskins are going to be neck and neck for the last place in this division. I see both of these teams being pretty just not good next season. I mean, I do think the Redskins, again, will be the worst team in this division. I think the hierarchy for this division will be the same as it was in 2019. But looking at the Redskins, obviously the biggest move in the offseason not only was drafting Chase Young, who everybody thinks is going to be a generational edge talent, really solidifying that just pass rush for the Redskins to be, I think, top 15, top 10 in the entire NFL. But besides that, I mean, again, they got Ron Rivera this season after going 3-13. He kind of brought in some of his pieces. I know he got his backup quarterback from the Panthers. Really no significant losses for this team. I know they did bring in Kendall Fuller and Ronald Darby, two pretty good cornerbacks, but again, I think they arguably had one of the worst drafts outside the first round they had no second round picks, and they only had 7 more picks beyond the first round. I mean, really no significant pieces. So again, I do see this team winning around 3 or 4 games this season, unless we see a significant jump from Dwayne Haskins in 2020.
I mean, I really like the signing of Ron Rivera. I think behind Doug Peterson, he's the second best head coach in this division. I
Yeah,
mean,
I agree.
you saw what he did in Carolina, helping them lead them to a Super Bowl caliber. They were a Super Bowl team. I think he's a really
Yeah.
good coach, and he knows how to rally the troops around him. But I mean, for the Redskins to be any good in this division and any good in the NFL, I think kind of have to make some changes. Dan Snyder, I think he has a little too much power in the organization, and you saw that when they drafted Dwayne Haskins, he was a hometown kid, and he kind of prompted the organization to draft Dwayne Haskins, even though that probably wasn't the right decision to make because we just don't know how Dwayne Haskins is going to be in the NFL. I mean, kudos to Dwayne Haskins training like the way he is this offseason. I mean, if you go on his Instagram, every picture is him outside throwing with someone, getting the work in, which he's an Ohio State guy, so I'm rooting for him, but I don't see Dwayne Haskins being that franchise quarterback that the Redskins are looking for. But I do think the Giants, like you said, the Giants and the Redskins are going to battle for the worst team in this division. I mean, I might even be a little bit higher on the Redskins winning the division. I mean, not the last team over the Giants.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this Redskins team just really lacks the weapons needed around Dwayne Haskins, around a young quarterback. They do have Terry McLaurin, who I think is one of the best wide receivers in this entire division. I think outside of the Cowboys, he's the best wide receiver in this division in terms of Eagles, Giants, Redskins. But besides that, you have an aging Adrian Peterson and really nothing else on that offensive side. They really don't have any offensive lineman talent to really warrant Dwayne Haskins kind of sitting back there, taking his time to throw, letting the wide receivers get open. So I do see the Redskins struggling this season. I do really see the Giants struggling this season. I think arguably more than the Redskins, again, like you said, because Redskins do have better coaching at this point than the Giants do. But again, I do think it is going to be between the Eagles and the Cowboys. I really don't like betting on either of these teams because either of these teams are very inconsistent year to year, and that is the Eagles and the Cowboys. But Cowboys on paper, again, are one of the best teams in the NFL, like they are every single season on paper. Jerry Jones always does a pretty good job of putting together a very talented roster, but I do think the kind of Super Bowl aspirations for the Cowboys have passed with kind of the signing of some of their big name players, especially Dak Prescott with 30 mil a year now. So I do think the Eagles are going to win this division, but I would certainly not be surprised to see the Cowboys come out of this division as victors and watch the Cowboys make a deep playoff run.
Yeah, I think the Eagles are definitely kind of the odds-on favorite to win this division. I think the Cowboys can definitely fight with the Eagles to become the top of the division. But that being said, I think they will finish second. And then with the Giants and the Redskins, I think looking at the coaching staffs like we talked about, and the Redskins having a really solid front seven, I think that will help them win a lot of games. I think I'm more confident in the Redskins placing third in this division with the Giants finishing last.
Certainly, and just looking at some of the teams they're playing, I think every single team in the NFC West is significantly better, honestly, at this point than the Giants and the Redskins. And I think every single team in the AFC North is better than the Giants and the Redskins, except maybe for the Cincinnati Bengals. So if they're losing all of those games and then maybe splitting some of their kind of divisional games, I don't really see a big win total for this team. And even looking at the Cowboys and the Eagles, I think every single NFC West matchup is going to be troublesome for the Eagles and the Cowboys. They really don't have a great history of matching up against teams like Seattle, like the Rams, like the 49ers, and even the AFC North, you have the Steelers and the Ravens, both teams that the Eagles and the Cowboys have struggled with in the past. So I definitely don't see the Eagles or the Cowboys eclipsing 12 wins this season, but I do think both teams will hover around the 9-7, 8-8, kind of 10-6 area.
Yeah, I think they kind of really lost the luck of the draw with the divisions they have to place because arguably they're playing two of the best divisions in all of football. But kind of another point I want to make is I can definitely see Carson Wentz kind of having an MVP type season. I
Yeah.
really like Carson Wentz. You like him a lot more than I like him, having him as the fifth best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
I would argue he's a little bit outside of the fifth, maybe six or five B. But I really like Carson Wentz. I can see him having a great season, and that's how the Eagles will be able to finish top of this division. But thank you everybody for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know what you think of the NFC East. Who's going to finish first? Who's going to finish last? Um, and also if you think Antonio Brown will sign to any NFL teams. But thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you in the next one.